All right, this is for the end of chapter 13. So sections 1313 through 1318. So it talks about the term survival of the fittest and it kind of defines what is fitness. When we talk about fitness, fitness is the ability of that individual to contribute to the next generation. So the better or more adapted it is to its environment, the more successful, or we call it reproductive success, it is in producing offspring that hopefully also has those genetic traits that made them successful in their environment. So kind of like this little cartoon, because we always think of fitness as someone who could do more push-ups or sit-ups or whatever, and that's not necessarily true. Whether you can do 100 push-ups or sit-ups is not going to help you, especially today. It's not like you're out doing a lot of hunting or protecting your family from raiding parties or whatever. So, or bears or other types of wild animals because we are apex predator. So, I kind of think this is a funny little cartoon. So, we have different types of selection. There is directional selection. And again, we tend to have a bell shaped curve with certain traits, especially if they're an incomplete dominance, right? So, that we definitely have those heterozygotes that are in the middle. And so what we're saying is that with directional, we're moving to one side of that bell-shaped curve. Are we selecting towards the dominant? Are we selecting towards the recessive? Or in the case of incomplete, are we selecting for the in the middle trait? So that is directional selection. Some examples are bacteria and antibiotic resistance. So as you know, we are selecting for bacteria that tends to be able to survive certain antibiotics. Those are the ones that survive. They pass that mutation on to their offspring, and then they survive the antibiotics. And now we have bacteria that are antibiotic resistance. Malaria is having the same issue. We have medication that we use to help fight that particular parasite. The parasites that have survived through patients that have been given that medication, of course, have some kind of mutation that allow them to tolerate that medication. They pass that on to their offspring, and now we have certain strains of malaria that's resistant to the medication. Horse and bear size. We've noticed that over time, horse and bears have gotten bigger, whether that's due to more a better environment for supporting that growth, or if you're a bigger horse, you can protect yourself better and outrun predators. If you're a bigger bear, you can hopefully, again, protect your family and hunting and get food more successfully than maybe a smaller bear. And then we have stabilizing selection. Stabilizing selection is where the population, we're looking at that middle, we're selecting against the extremes. So the extreme dark in a population or extreme light in a population are not successful. We're looking at success being more as the average in that particular characteristic or phenotype. Disruptive is where the average phenotype is selected against, and the extremes are more successful in that environment. Some examples of disruptive are snail colors. We've noticed that there is actually 3 colors. There's kind of an incomplete dominance here. And in that particular habitat, there is 2 different types of ground cover. And depending on your color shell, you blend in one to one ground cover better than the other. If you're intermediate, you don't really blend in well with either ground cover, and so you get picked off by predators. We also see this with bird beak size. So we know with birds that have large beaks, they're able to crack the big hard seeds. Small beaks, they're able to manipulate the little soft seeds. But if you have a beak side that's in between, it's not quite strong enough to crack those hard seeds, and it's a little too big to work those fine um, movements that they need to crack the soft seeds. So again, we're selecting for the large or small. The medium beak sizes don't do so well. And without being able to utilize their food, they have less food, they have less energy, they're not able to feed their young as well. And so they are selected against. So here's kind of a summary using mice with different variations in fur color. So notice our original population goes from light to dark. Here we have that stabilizing where we're choosing for the in between color. Directional where we're moving towards the dark. We could also move towards the light. Disruptive is where you do well if you're dark and you do well if you're light, but if you're in the middle, you don't do so well. You get picked on by predators. You're not as successful. You're not as fit as the other two colors of mice. Then we also have this thing called sexual dimorphism, and this is where the males look different than the females. So your book talks about this. And again, everything they talked about in the end is kind of just a touch on some of these topics. Generally, males tend to be bigger, more colorful. They're trying to attract a mate. I mean, think about it. If you're a male peacock and you have those big, huge feathers, you're not only beautiful, but you must also be able to evade predators, which, when you have this big, hello, I'm here plumage, that has to also be a sign of intelligence and survival skills. And so that is something that attracts the females. So we can see we've got a garden spider or orb weaver. The males are generally bigger. Maintenance of variation. Heterozygotes are really important for maintenance of variation. Again, individuals that carry the recessive gene or display the milder version of this mutation would be an example of sickle cell anemia. We generally talk about this one in a lot of evolutionary topics because it's one that has been so clearly defined and observable today. So when we talk about sickle cell anemia, there's a huge question about, okay, what's this genetic inheritance pattern? It is a recessive, it is an autosomal recessive disorder, but what we find is that if you are homozygous recessive, you truly show these symptoms of sickle cell anemia. But if you're heterozygous, your symptoms tend to be very mild. All right, so it doesn't really fit. It's not like codominant where you see both, or incomplete where it's in the middle. It's a milder symptomology, I guess you could call it. So here we have our normal red blood cells. And what happens is when, excuse me, is when oxygen is low. So when you're exerting yourself, it causes this protein that has a point mutation to basically become denatured, and it folds up in a different way, and it causes the shape of the red blood cell to change to the sickle cell. And with this sickle cell shape, it tends to clog the capillaries, the blood vessels, which can cause lack of oxygen to major organs, cells, and tissues, which could cause organ failure. It can also cause a lot of pain. The red blood cells have to be broken down. We can't fix them, so we have to break them down. So now we have a lower number of red blood cells. So that's where we get that anemic term from. So people that have this are often very tired. What we have noticed is that you could be carriers. And of course, when we have our carriers, we have a 25% chance of their offspring being homozygous normal or homozygous recessive, and 50% being heterozygous. Here is that point mutation I was talking about. So we have one base change that has changed. Our normal amino acid would be glutamic acid. Our mutant one is valine, and that is what is giving that shape change to our red blood cell. Now, malaria, when you have a mosquito, it is carried by the Anopheles mosquito, a specific strain of, or specific species of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes will bite you. When they bite you, they spit inside you because if they were to bite you, you would clot so fast that they wouldn't get a meal. So they spit an anticoagulant into you, and that's generally what you're allergic to and causes it to itch. certain species of mosquitoes have different types of anticoagulants, which is why maybe some bites don't swell up as bad as other ones, more allergic to certain types of mosquitoes. In this case, not only are they spitting the anticoagulant in there, but they're also spitting the malaria. Malaria is a parasite. So that parasite will then go into the liver, where it will kind of take residence. It will then get into the red blood cells. It will finish its life cycle in there. It will rupture the red blood cells, and it's generally in a cycle depending on which strain of malaria you get. And this could lead to death. So if you have X number of red blood cells splitting open at one given time, you cannot undergo cellular respiration adequately, and it will lead to death. So malaria can, and I won't say it will, but it can kill you. And then what happens is they hatch out of the red blood cell, the mosquito takes another meal, and then it sucks it up and gets reinfected, where it finishes its life cycle in the gut of the mosquito. And then we go back around and around again. So what we have found in the African American population, they had noticed that many of the African Americans population carry this sickle cell anemia, and the question was why. And then we looked at malaria, and this is that evolution piece. We noticed if you were in an area that was high in malaria, if you were normal, you would die from malaria. If you had, and I'm going to excuse you, I got a couple minutes here and I got students coming in, so kind of bear with me here. If you have the sickle cell disease, you die from sickle cell anemia. If you're heterozygous, you are more fit in an environment, and when that parasite goes into your red blood cell, your body's able to identify it because it uses oxygen and causes that red blood cell. Could you guys come in quietly? I'm making a video. So it identifies those cells that have malaria in it and will take it out of the population. So those people that are heterozygous, we're selecting for that heterozygous. So that is that stabilizing effect that we have there. So what is evolution? What isn't it? So evolution is not perfect. It's not goal-oriented. Those individuals that are successful today may not be tomorrow, because the world is constantly changing, and whether you have the correct adaptations for that environment depends on your genetic ability to cope with it. If you do not cope with it, you die. Those that can cope with it will pass those genes on to their offspring. So I hope that this presentation was helpful to you. And if you have any questions, as always, you can reach out to me. If I can get this to stop. It will not.